industry. And I currently work at Mareana, and we are, as you can see on the screen, a AI-powered manufacturing intelligence software company for life sciences. We'll define that in a few minutes. I know people like Gartner are just beginning to use that word, so we'll explain that in a few minutes. And you are at the Pharma Manufacturing Reloaded event, and you're here to talk about Knowledge Graph as the CPV and VSM multiplier. Okay? Okay, some introduction questions. So first of all, can you imagine speaking at an event in Q1 of 2026? Do you talk about AI? Right? Because a year ago, if I didn't mention AI, I think I'd lose half the room. Now, if I mention AI, especially in the life science arena, people are worried about risk. So it's like you can't win. I don't even think AI could have come up with the right presentation to kind of find that balance. I got one laugh, thank you. That was my only joke, I appreciate it. All right, the second one. Can you imagine, again, speaking to a group this diverse, as smart as pharma manufacturing people are, and as skeptical as quality people are? I'm sure I have both in the room. Again, I got another smile at least. Quality people, perfect. How many quality? Usually you ask that in the life science group, and no matter where they fit, supply chain, manufacturing, they all raise their hand, right? And I appreciate that too. But why do I share this tidbit? You can see my little manufacturing guy, you can see my little quality guy. Oftentimes when I do a presentation, if I talk about what I do, people are like, but where'd you do it? And if I talk about where I did it, they're anxious to find out, what do you do, right? So my request is just be patient. I'm going to interweave a little bit about what we do and about how we do it, both. So you'll see that come out in a few minutes. So be patient. And last but not least, can you imagine you sign up to do a speaking engagement at this event, and 1 week later, Gartner comes out and steals your thunder with an article on the exact topic. So the cool part is it's a hot topic, right? It's an important topic. You can see Gartner came out with an article. It's called Knowledge Graphs, the Healthcare and Life Sciences CIO's Path to AI Precision and Data Value. Now, they articulated it a little bit differently than I will, but I wanted you to get a sense that you're in good company, right? It's an important topic. Hopefully you'll see that in a few minutes. All right, next. This is not contents, this is context. Okay, not content, context. Mareana does not do anything new. So now you're wondering why you even came to this room, right? Continuous process verification and multivariate analysis is not new. Even now, today though, we do it on fast-moving data, which is super cool, but even that's not terribly new. Value stream mapping is not new. You still need to see end-to-end product flow and simulate a new one for tariff optimization. So what is new? You can put in future flows, maybe in value stream mapping 5 years ago. That was a little cumbersome. CMC is not new. You still need to do regulatory filings, right? At this point, even chatbot and agents are not new. Some may even say they're part of the problem, right? So what am I here to talk about? So what do? We do all of the things I mentioned better. And you'll hear a lot of companies here today, and they say, we are a digital-first company. And you'll hear some, I got one smile, you'll hear some people say, we're a data-first company, two important things. Mareana is a knowledge graph first company. And if you don't know what that means, don't worry. I'm about to give my poor man's definition for knowledge graph and why it matters for CPV and related. Okay, here we go. The data lake delivered, imagine if, so I talked about can you imagine, so imagine if the data lake delivered on its promises and AI did not hallucinate, since these are often the foundation of many of today's CPV and VSM solutions. What's the problem? The problem is a complexity matrix. You don't have to read all the details in there. I'll talk you through it very simply, right? I see a few faces from GSK and AstraZeneca and large pharma companies, and oftentimes when I meet someone, I'm like, what do? Small molecule, large molecule, cell therapy, and they're like, yes, I get it, right? So you do all of that. And oftentimes they all have a little bit of different flavors. Many times the small molecule stuff is heavily dependent on external manufacturing. Think CDMO, right? Think here paper-based. Many times the biologics or the large molecule, you do it in-house, right? It's at least $1 billion entry fee to set up a vaccine plant, right? And so CDMOs are slower to adopt that. And last but not least, the cell therapy, right? We're going to talk about batches in a little while. We have one client that does cell therapy. It's a 7,000-page paper batch. Just imagine that, right? So this is the problem. It's the complexity matrix. Down below, I didn't even talk about that. You have systemic software for things like ERP and MES and QMS, right, and LIMS, but they all sit on different structures. So how can you aggregate that data in a really efficient, fast way? And then no matter how digitized you are, there's a lot of paper in the systems, right? External manufacturing on paper batches, people in pre-commercial oftentimes don't want to use an MES system. It's not worth the investment if you would, because it's so fast moving. And the solution is a knowledge graph. Think data lake 2.0. I didn't make up these words. They all come from a client. So the data, I do not sell a data lake, full stop. I am not here to compete with Neo4j or Palantir or Altair. I stand on top of them. And they're all in front of me, believe it or not, creating the market. They're like, and you'll see this on the slides in a few minutes. You know, all of those systems I just mentioned, they all want to put them in the data lake, and that's cool. There's good performance there, and they're all in one space. You don't have to worry about necessarily APIs. But how you aggregate and contextualize that data to use it, right, in a meaningful way in CPV or multivariate analysis, et cetera, that's the question. That's the trick, right? So why do you want to do that, first of all? I'm going to give my knowledge graph for dummies, not that you guys are dumb, right? If I went to your house and I said, give me all the blue shirts, I would go to your closets. You guys are, you know, all OCD because you're in life sciences. You've got, you know, pants on the left, shirts on the right. So you go to the right and you pick out the blue. You go to your spouses. They've got the blues together and the greens together. So you go to the blue section. You pick out the shirts. Your kids, who knows what they have. That's storing your clothes in a structured database. I got one smile. Thank you. So one alternative is to take, you're like, that's too much work. Another alternative is to take all of those clothes and just put them in your garage. That's a data lake. You might organize it and structure it. You may not. Different philosophies on that. But that's still a lot of work, right? To go in there and sort through the clothes as the data models are different, and the high velocity of adding new systems, the high velocity of fast-moving data, you get the idea. So what would a knowledge graph version of this look like? If you go to the cleaners on Monday and you give in your shirts or pants and they tag it, you go on, your spouse goes on Tuesday, they give it, your kids go on Wednesday, they give it. You show up on Friday, you just give your name and it all comes. That's a knowledge graph. So as the data flowed in, right, it was attached to the right edge and the right node, right, in real time without a common data model. More on this to come, but we're not the first people to solve CPV and MSAT, I know you're an MSAT guy, et cetera, with this solution. The question is, how do you do it without breaking the bank, right? So that's my next slide. Imagine if you could get all your data in a knowledge graph in 15 hours of AI ML time instead of 15 weeks, and I'm being generous, SME time, without waiting for an ontology and perfect data in days, even with compliance overhead. So a couple things, because someone's going to react and say, how am I going to do this without ontology, and why don't I have to clean data? So the thing that Mareana does when they create those knowledge graphs is they start from the transactional data, and it works extremely well in life sciences because it's a regulated environment. The guy on the shop floor, he makes sure that the data is right. The guy on the receiving dock doing the receiving inspection, he makes sure the data is right. The guy on the shipping dock, right, where it has to go into a refrigerated truck, he makes sure the data is right. So we start with that transactional data and we build up. And the ontology is actually an output, not an input into what we do, right? And there may be some need for a semantic layer. In one system, it was acidity. In another system, it was pH factor. In one system, it was Celsius. In another system, it was Fahrenheit. And that has to, in one view, it has to be reconciled. But we'll give you a chance, right, when we give you the ontology to say, at the semantic layer, what do I want to use? Let me show you a picture of what I just described. We've already had too many words. All right, so here we go. This is every company. Life sciences are not, quite frankly, right? You buy stuff, you make stuff, you sell stuff. I know you account for it and do some HR. That's not on my slide. If you're doing a supply chain value stream map, you'll get data typically almost exclusively from an ERP system. If you're doing CPV, you're going to get data from ERP, QMS, MES, LIMS, Historian, paper batches. You get the idea? I have a current prospect right now who says, I have 200 external parties between CDMOs, vendors, labs, think C of A, right? And he said, I spent 6 months trying to get them to agree on one data model. I said, how'd you do? He goes, 0 agreed, right? So what happens as a result of that is everyone takes that data. They used to put it into a data warehouse. The slide's old. Today they put it into a data lake, but it still sits there in silos. So if you look at the lower left-hand side, they take a small army of people, right? Weeks, if I'm being generous, typically months and a lot of SMEs, to create the mapping, to get to the reports, the charts, the dashboards, and the genealogies. Right? And everyone recognizes that that's valuable, and having it in a graph so that you can report against it in one homogeneous fashion is useful. But how do you get there without breaking the bank? That's really the big question. And this is where Mareana comes in. They bring all of that data into one place and create the knowledge graph in hours or days, right? It says mapping, it just probably say relationships, to get the same outputs, reports, charts, dashboards, and genealogies. That's the idea, right? To give you a real-world example how, without taking the cover off the machine learning and the modeling, it's this. We had a client who said they wanted 17 years worth of batches to get rid of analytical bias. Yahya, who works with me, he remembers the story. And in addition to that, they had hundreds of thousands of cleaning records. Now think about when I give you this knowledge graph, typically you'll see it in the form of a genealogy. You want to be able to put in a batch record, right? See all the raw material inputs, see all the operations, see what the customer went to, and single click investigations. You want to see the ERP data, the batch record that's either in MES or paper, the C of A, the LIMS, the QMS, you get the idea. How do we do that with AR and ML? So I'll give you the cleaning room example. Hundreds of thousands of documents. A lot of people think, well, when you're joining all this up, what do you need? You need a batch record, or maybe a batch record and a material number, or an item number, or a product code. You get the idea. Well, the cleaning record didn't have any of that. But what did it have? It had room number, it had equipment number, it had date and time, right? But guess what? The batch record had that same information. It had room number, it had equipment number, it had date and time. And that's one example. It knows to look for that. We use that's a very simple example to show you how the machine learning works in joining this together. In full transparency, there's probably a 3% orphan rate the first time you run it, where we have to sit down with subject matter experts and say, okay, how do we resolve this? It doesn't make sense. Okay, I'm getting smiles and nods. I'm gonna keep going. I'm only gonna take a few more minutes. Okay, so I just discussed Mareana and superpower number one, right? The value of the knowledge graph we didn't create, but the idea is how you get the value out of the knowledge graph we do create, right? By using the AI ML to populate that data inside the graph. The other superpower we tell people is we don't just do data across systems, QMS. We don't just do data across site. We do it across enterprise, right? We have one example where we do one client, medtech company, 26 ERP systems, all configured differently, right? Some SAP, some JD Edwards. Yeah? I'll talk louder? Oh, there you go. I just hold it higher. Thank you, Ganesh. In addition to MES systems and LIMS systems, in addition to OEM manufacturers and CDMOs, where the touch point sometimes is they drop a file to a SharePoint. Sometimes they give us an API, but more often than not, they give us paper. So we have a method to use AI and ML, not just to create the knowledge graph, but to look at the paper and take out the parameters, whether it's a key parameter or a critical parameter, and trend it, right, in a GxP validated way. So the way we do it is when we scan the PDF or the paper batch record, it's 2 passes actually for 3 goals. I know that's a lot, but stick with me. 2 passes in the sense that the first one is natural language processing and machine learning, because we can do a super high level of rigor about what's the confidence that we got the right thing. Now, if it's a low confidence, we'll ask human in the loop to go in there and update it. The 7 look like a Z. They do that 2 or 3 times. If it's the same operator, machine learning, we'll figure that out, right? We do that pass, and then we do a second pass using AI for all the handwritten notes in the margins, on the bottom, et cetera. Which a different process, usually a human in the loop, unless it's an extreme pattern. And then with that scan, those 2 scans, I should say, we do 3 things, right? We pull out the BOM information to create a genealogy on the knowledge graph. We pull out the key and critical parameters to do trending, right? Why is this yield on this batch lower than the golden batch? And we pull out what I'll call the auxiliary information, think signatures and dates, to do AI-assisted batch release, probably better said batch review, but we can debate that depending on what your company does. If it's a 20-page fill-finish batch, we can do batch release. If it's a 7,000-page cell therapy, we're probably, even with all the auxiliary documentation, we're probably doing batch review and not necessarily batch release yet. Caveat. Okay, questions? No? Want to respect your time, we got a few more minutes. Okay, so I'm going to go back to talking about Gartner for a minute, what they said, and just see how it aligned with the story I was going to tell even before I saw their article. Right? So knowledge graphs address persistent data fragmentation and interoperability issues. I think that interoperability is really the issue, right? I gave the case example of a company saying we have 200 external parties. How do we aggregate all that data into one knowledge graph so that we can have single-click investigations, so we can have easy analytics without having. We did an ROI calculator, create a business case for coming up with a solution to solve that. And that was super easy to do. That 125 data engineers. Like, okay, that's the problem. You get the idea that we were trying to solve. Knowledge graphs unlock advanced high-value use cases across healthcare and life sciences. Right? And that, it's really based on point one. I'm just quoting Gartner here. And last but not least, knowledge graphs require targeted investment and robust oversight for effective deployment. You're going to spend money one way or another. You're going to spend it hiring 125 data engineers, or for less money, bringing in some good AI ML software. No one from quality has raised their hand yet and said, but, right? Yeah, your quality. So a few things, right? So we have our own internal SDLC process, CSV process. So when we deliver the software, which with an IQ, OQ, and a PQ, of course, if you completely change it, we're going to do our own fit for intended use testing and maybe elongate that process. Extremely rare. SOC 9000 and 27000, I'm looking at you because you're quality compliant, right? SOC 2, Type 2 compliance will be done within 30 days from now. And in the run business phase, everything is version controls and CRF 21 Part 11 e-signed. Why did I mention version control? A big part of the compliance is a dev, a test, a prod. We make an exception for people who want faster turn on reports. We allow versioning, but you can't use it until compliance have approved that version. And the large language model that we do, we respect the January 2025 guidance that came out from the FDA that says it's got to be run locally, it's got to be run only on your data. You got to put a human in the loop if you're not guaranteed that you get the idea. So I'm not demoing it all today, but happy, another date and time for us to go through that, all of that. Good. So full transparency, 2 deployment models. We have 4 deployment models, only 2 active. One deployment model is it goes on your VSP, your virtual private cloud, your VPC, excuse me, your virtual private cloud. But we manage it, right? We look at the Kubernetes, we do all the L2 and L3 support. You get the idea. And that's because we started in large pharma. So think J&J, Kenvue, BMS. I know Ganesh is sitting over here. So that's been the method. We have, for the last 18 months, gone a little down market. Some asset light, maybe they have 1 patent. Maybe they have 1 manufacturing site. Maybe they only use CDMOs, in which case we're hosting it. But it's single tenant, right? So it's a dedicated server. We have a multi-tenant box. We use it exclusively for demos and POCs, just so it saves a lot of time. We have another deployment model that says you can put it in your rack. Not one person does that anymore. So we haven't had any use cases for that, but it is possible. Okay. With that said, I'm going to show you one more thing. I said, you don't know what I do and where have I done it. Public information. I know Ganesh is here from BMS. I didn't even know that BMS was going to go to IFPAC, right? It's public use, and talk about our Mareana manufacturing intelligence platform that they use for CPV to solve all the problems we just described, right? Of data interoperability. And you can see here what their problem was. 80% of the time on data engineering. I gave a different client where they had 125 data engineers, so not surprising. 20% on analysis, and the solution was moving to Mareana's manufacturing intelligence. What was the result? After implementing Mareana's manufacturing intelligence, 90% reduction in speed, no errors or deviation, and 60% reduction in cost. So give you a flavor of the value, who else has done it. I know you'd have a million more questions. I met a small virtual pharma company. And I met the executive vice president, reported right to the CEO, in charge of CPV and MSAT and all operations, right? All OT. And he said, I have the budget and the grant of authority, let's go to work. We didn't start that project for 12 months. What he didn't realize, there's some invasiveness here depending on how you install and what you do. So we had to meet with the manufacturing guy and get him on board, right? We had to meet with the quality person. I mean, we're doing 7,000-page batch record, AI-assisted batch release, or batch release by exception. You're not doing that without talking to a whole lot of people, right? So I got that piece. This is, we make it as turnkey as it can be, but there's some change management and socialization that has to go on to make this work. And I think that's the end of my slides. Any questions?